Language and identity. Language is closely connected to a person's identity, especially ethnic identity. For example, a Filipino can be identified as Visayan if he or she speaks Visayan. An Ilocano is identified as being Ilocano by speaking Ilocano. Even the kind of English a person speaks identifies his or her identity. According to GILES' theory of accommodation, if a person wishes to be identified with a target ethnic group, that person will try to remove his or her own ethnic markers when trying to speak the target language. On the other hand, if a person wishes to distinguish oneself from the target ethnic group, that person will highlight his or her ethnic markers when speaking the target language. For example, a Scotsman who wishes to be identified with English people will try to remove the markers in his speech that will mark him as a Scotsman. He will highlight such markers as Scottish accent when speaking English, however, if he wants to be distinguished from Englishmen. Within a society, the way a person speaks can identify that person as belonging to a particular group within a society. For instance, rich people talk differently from the way poor people speak, even if they both speak the same language. There is also a difference between how people in urban and rural areas speak the same language. Furthermore, educated people, or those who try to show themselves as educated, speak a language differently from less educated or uneducated people, or even speak a different language, as when such people speak English instead of Filipino or any other Philippine language. Each group will pronounce words differently and take a different intonation. A person belonging to one group but tries to speak in a way another group would talk would be labeled as either pretentious or weird. The most salient feature of language used for identification is pronunciation, or accent. In the Book of Judges in the Bible, pronunciation served to identify whether a man was an enemy or not, as shown in chapter 12 of the Book of Judges verses 5-6, from the New International Version. The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim, and whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he replied, "No," they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." If he said, Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. In fact, the primary way to suppress identities is by suppressing language. Throughout history, governments have forbidden certain ethnic groups from speaking their own language. On the other hand, language has also been a rallying point for national identity. This can be seen in current movements in the Philippines to defend Filipino from the dominance of English by demanding that Filipino continue to be taught at the tertiary level. This dominance of English in the Philippines is seen as another aspect of unwanted globalization. The identity of a person can also be inferred by the way people speak to them. For instance, William Foley reports that Nootka Indians in the Pacific speak with a different pronunciation when they speak to hunchbacks or circumcised males. In Africa, speaking French to a person may indicate that that person is subservient to the speaker because French had been the language of colonial masters for a long time. You obviously know that a person speaks in a different way to his servants and to his friends. Identity can also be tied with language prestige. In many cases, a person who is proficient in a prestigious language or dialect is accorded a higher status than a person who is not proficient in that language. In England, for example, people who speak with received pronunciation, the dialect of royalty, are viewed as people of high standing. This is why the nobility is expected to avoid speaking using Cockney or other non-standard varieties of English but should instead speak using received pronunciation. In the Philippines, a person proficient in Spanish may be accorded the status given to old rich Filipinos. This was particularly true when people of Spanish ancestry still owned many lands in the country. Nowadays, Filipino children who speak English as their first language are accorded by many people with a higher status than children who don't. That is one reason why some parents try to get their children to speak English as their first language by speaking English to them. However, many parents who do so are themselves not very proficient in English, and so the children end up speaking poor English. And for this reason, the high status attributed to children speaking English as their first language is slowly being eroded. Language can still serve as a mark of identity even long after its communicative use has been abandoned by its speakers. In other words, a people group can still associate their identity with a language even if they no longer speak it. This is true in the case of both Gaelic, the language of Scotland in olden times, and that of Irish Gaeilge. While neither most Scots nor most Irish people speak these languages, they still attach a sense of identity with these languages. Contrast this with Old or Middle English, which native English speakers do not associate with their identity. Language purism and prescriptivism. The desire to protect one's identity through language may result in two strongly held ideas. One is language purism. This is when a member of a speech community believes that the features of their language, particularly vocabulary, pronunciation and grammar, must be protected from change, especially from outside influences such as replacement of words with borrowed ones. A kind of prescriptivism can result from this idea, such as when some forms are prescribed to be used instead of what is seen as simplification due to outside influence or laziness. An example of this is when a good number of English speakers bemoan the pronunciation of news as news. In the Philippines, some Tagalog speakers may bemoan the use of bayaran instead of ipagbabayad, or may complain when speakers use siya to refer to inanimate objects. A classic example of such purism and prescriptivism was when a writer in Europe complained about undesirable changes happening in Latin. These changes eventually produced the language French. Such ideas as purism and prescriptivism have given rise to language academies and language councils. These institutions have been given the legal authority to make pronouncements about language usage. In the United Kingdom, the desire to preserve the purity of English came in the form of dictionary making. Samuel Johnson's production of a dictionary, Dictionary of the English Language, in 1755, was intended to produce a standard based on what he perceived to be undefiled English, hoping that this would help prevent what he believed was the degeneration of the English language. In the United States, however, Noah Webster believed that the United States should have a separate linguistic identity by way of having a version of English different from that of Great Britain, including differences in spelling. He dreamed that the two countries would eventually have separate languages. His efforts resulted in the production of his own dictionary, American Dictionary of the English Language, in 1828. Language will always be an essential part of one's identity. The different dynamics of language serve to strengthen a person and a group's identity. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more informative discussion on language, culture, and society.